government to pay a total of at least 1 million to 1.2 million rand to each of the complainants in the Life Esidimeni matter. Moseneke was delivering his final report in Parktown in Johannesburg today after a protracted set of hearings in the situation that led to the deaths of at least 144 mental health patients who were transferred to unregistered NGOs. We're now joined in studio by Sasha Stevenson, a lead attorney at social justice organisation Section 27, who's been championing the cause for the bereaved families for a number of years now. Thanks so much for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, so we saw much of the judgment on television, and the families were quite relieved, I guess, at the end. Do you think that they got the justice that they were looking for?
I think so, yes. It's been a very long process. As you say, it started 2 years ago with warnings about what may happen, and then we've had 43 days of hearing, 2 days of legal argument, and a lot of information's come out. Not all of the information has come out, and so there's still some remaining frustration about not knowing exactly what happened. But the families in all are pleased that there has been this recognition of their loss and of their role in this process, and I think are now ready to move on, knowing that the mental health system needs to improve and that government is committed to improve it.
All right. When I heard some of the words that the former Deputy Chief Justice used throughout his judgment, he used words like torture, murderous, cruelty. It was a harrowing story.
It was such a harrowing story, and a lot of those individual human stories came out in the course of the arbitration. But of course there are so many more. There are many people who sat quietly in that arbitration hall, holding their stories close to them. And I think this is now an opportunity for them to start healing, to get the counselling that they need, but also for South Africa as a whole to acknowledge what happened and how this was allowed to unravel in the way that it did.
All right, so unpack the top lines, as it were, of the judgment that we heard today.
So the part of the judgment that's in the news is the compensation. There was an award of, in total, 1.2 million for each of the families, the affected families, and that the bulk of that award is in respect of constitutional damages. So that is damages for the violation of constitutional rights. It's a very new and innovative remedy in our law. Also part of the award, though, was some important systemic recommendations, such as the reporting of various health professionals to their professional bodies, the development of a monument or a place of remembrance so that this issue isn't forgotten, and also the ongoing reporting to the Ombudsman and also to the affected families on progress towards implementation of the improvement plan that the Gauteng Department of Health has put in place. So there's both individual redress, seeking to remedy some of the constitutional violations, and looking to the future to try and ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again and that our system is strengthened. All
right, help us unpack the layers of awards, because not everyone gets 1.2. This 200,000 is for the bereaved, isn't it?
That's
and then
right.
Everybody gets at least 1 million. Is that?
That's right.
How many people are we talking about, and the different layers of awards?
Well, in total, 144 people died, 1,418 people survived, and of those people, 44 are still missing. Section 27 represents 63 of the bereaved families. An organization called Her to Speak represents 4 of the bereaved families, and those are all of the bereaved families of people who died within the relevant period who have come forward. So there may be others still out there, but those are the people who have come forward. Legal Aid South Africa represents a number of the survivors and their families, so they fit into that category, and their award is for constitutional damages.
All right, so what happens now? The awards must be made by June, I believe.
That's
but then
right.
Is there going to be more justice, criminal justice maybe?
Well, what the Deputy Chief Justice made very clear is that the police need to continue investigating. The police have been investigating this case, as has the Special Investigations Unit. And what Justice Moseneke said is that it's not for him to make recommendations to the police that they must essentially do their jobs. They must continue doing those investigations. And so much information and evidence have come out through this arbitration hearing that will be very useful to the police, and that has been made available to the police. And then we trust that they will hand those investigations over to the NPA for prosecution for the next stage of accountability in this process.
You're a lawyer. Is there prima facie evidence for criminal prosecution?
We think that there is in respect of various role players, but of course that is for the police to investigate, to nail down the details, and to take forward to prosecution.
Importantly, the MEC was using the word collective decisions. The judge recognized collective responsibility, but he also said there's very much individual responsibility here at play.
Absolutely. I mean, the Constitution specifically provides for both individual and collective responsibility in respect of the executive in particular. And the MEC is the executive in health in Gauteng. It's insufficient to suggest that all accountability should be collective and nothing that should fall at the feet of a particular individual. When somebody wields such power, they also need to hold that responsibility. And in this case, no one was willing or prepared to do that, including people at the top of the Department of Health.
So what are the lessons learned here? Court decisions usually set precedents. Is it the same with arbitrations? And what can government and leaders of government learn from this in the future?
So strictly, arbitration awards don't have precedential value, so they are not binding on future arbitrations or on courts. But what has come out of this arbitration legally and from a human rights perspective has been incredibly important. And the fact that the arbitration award is delivered by the former Deputy Chief Justice certainly gives it weight for other judicial officers in the future. But I think some of the lessons that can be learned from the arbitration and from the tragedy are responsiveness, first of all. The fact that government needs to be responsive to people who come forward and say that there's a problem here. And in this case, many people did over a stretch of 2 years. But government wasn't responsive. There was an assumption that people didn't know what they were talking about, or that they had some devious motive. So I think responsiveness is the first thing. But secondly, it's persistence. In the room today, we had many people, many families who had persisted in this matter for such a long time, who had been caring for their loved ones at Life Esidimeni and raised the alarm very, very early on, who went through protests, who went through 2 court actions that we represented them in, and who still weren't listened to but pushed through to the end of this process. And I think it's a lesson for citizens and for government, that there's a need for that kind of persistence and that kind of activism to resolve some of the systemic weaknesses and problems that we have and prevent this kind of thing from happening.
I think one of the things that came through as well was there are layers of victims, and a lot of people will focus on those that died and the survivors maybe, but the families very much were victims of this as well, weren't they? And
Absolutely.
Hence they were recognized by the judge.
Absolutely. I mean, what the judge said is that the dignity of the families was infringed as well. The fact that people had to go through this experience, that they had to see the bodies of their loved ones that were sometimes rotting, that they weren't allowed to make any decisions or be in any way involved in the decision making in respect of their loved ones, was undignified. And it was that removal of dignity that was so harmful and so hurtful to so many people. So there'll be a process of healing, I'm sure, out of this tragedy.
In your legal career, have you seen anything like this before? I mean, it's when you tell the story about the numbers and when you hear how people died, it's almost hard to believe. It
is hard to believe. It's horrific. It's the biggest mass death in South African democracy, and it's been thoroughly horrifying. But I think it's also brought out some of the best in our society. It's brought out these families who have stood together and have stood up for themselves and their loved ones. It's brought out very powerful and empathetic civil society in the form of South African Depression and Anxiety Group, South African Federation for Mental Health, both organizations that work with people with mental illnesses and have been pushing for justice all along, and health professionals like those from the South African Society of Psychiatrists who refuse to be quiet, who refuse to take the easy route. So I think in all of the horror, we've seen some of the best that we have to offer, and that in some way gives hope that we can fix this system and that we can make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
All right, and the judge donating his fees, I mean, that was well received as well, and I guess speaks to how personally he took this.
Absolutely, I think that was really moving and really appropriate, and we can only thank the Justice for his outstanding or the outstanding way in which he dealt with this matter, and that very kind gesture at the end.
All right, Sasha, we'd have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed for fighting the good fight for so long, and I think in the end, you know, the truth came out. Still more to go perhaps, but certainly this chapter has had a happy ending, or a positive ending. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, so that's where we'll leave it for the time being. That was Sasha Stevenson, who's one of the lead attorneys, Section 27, that was representing the bereaved families at the Life Esidimeni tragedy. We'll have more for you after this break. Stay with us.